October 11th, 1994, Providence, Rhode Island. The sun is going down behind the State House, and about 20 people are climbing up the marble steps in the cold. They're holding candles. A man steps forward to light the first one. His name is Carl Batty, and 7 years ago, his sister Rebecca was murdered in her own home. It happened 2 doors down from the killer's house. Now, he lights his candle, he passes the flame to the person beside him, and says, "We'd like these candles to continue to burn in our hearts and our minds for all the victims who aren't here." Now, here's what you need to understand about this vigil. It's not an anniversary. Nobody died on October 11th. October 11th is a birthday. Tonight, a man locked up in the state turns 21 years old. And for 5 straight years, Rhode Island has dreaded this very date. Because under state law, today's the day Rhode Island must open the door and let him walk. There's no parole board, no review, there's no conditions. The law was clear. He was 15 when he did it. And in Rhode Island in 1989, a 15-year-old, no matter what he did, cannot be held past his 21st birthday. Full stop. And his record doesn't just close, it gets sealed. He walks out with no criminal record at all, like none of it ever happened. His name is Craig Price. 2 women, 2 little girls, all neighbors, all within a few hundred yards of his front door. He confessed on tape. He admitted everything in open court. There's never been a question about who did it, and the sentence for all of it, every last day the law allowed, expired this morning. So why is the governor of Rhode Island standing on these steps tonight telling the crowd, quote, Craig Price is spending his 21st birthday right now where he belongs, behind bars? Like I said, this is the day Rhode Islanders dread it, because tonight, Craig Price isn't walking out a free man. He's sitting across town in Cranston behind barbed wire and brick walls of the adult correctional institutions, the ACI. The murder sentence is done. It finished after 5 years, been completed this very day, and yet the door stayed shut anyway. How and why? That's the story nobody tells about this case. The real story here is about what happened after the crime. We have a courtroom that the public was never allowed inside, a law written because of one teenager, a law that could never be used on that teenager, in a state that got 5 years warning that a confessed killer was walking free, and when the law gave them nothing, came up with their own workaround. Craig Price finished his sentence for 4 murders on October 11, 1994, yet he's still locked up today, 37 years after his arrest, and not a single day since has been for the murders. Now, I pulled the original 1989 Boston Globe pages on this case. I've read the Rhode Island Supreme Court record, 6 separate opinions, and I've read the book that they wrote about the fight to keep him inside. Now, after all that, I can tell you right now that this is the strangest legal story in New England's history. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. I want to know, how does a man serve 37 years on a sentence that ended in 1994? Stay with me. Let's rewind. July 27th, 1987, 7 years before that vigil on the State House steps. Buttonwoods is the kind of neighborhood people think doesn't exist anymore. It sits on a little peninsula in Warwick, Rhode Island, right on the water. Kids ride bikes down the middle of the street. Neighbors call out to each other by name. Almost nobody locks their doors. The whole neighborhood turns out for the 4th of July parade. They welcome new families with baked goods. One writer who spent years studying this place called it, quote, a neighborhood in a time warp. And in the summer of 1987, 27-year-old Becky Spencer is about to start her life over. Becky's a single mom, recently divorced, 2 young kids. And tomorrow is moving day. A better job, a fresh start. The house is nearly empty. Everything she owns is packed in boxes, and each one is tied off with twine. Her kids are spending the night at their father's place. So Becky spreads some blankets on the living room floor in front of her TV, and she falls asleep alone. Her brother Carl works nights as a security guard. He gets home at dawn. And at dawn on July 28th, Carl Batty walks into the living room and finds his sister. She's been stabbed 58 times. And the weapon? It came from inside the house. One of Becky's packing knives, the same knife she used to cut the twine on the boxes that she never got to move. Now hold on to that name, Carl Batty, because you've already met him. He's the man on the State House steps in 1994, lighting the first candle. This is where his story starts. The murder of Becky Spencer detonates in Buttonwoods. And for the first time anyone can remember, doors get locked, porch lights stay on. The police work the case hard, and I mean hard. Detectives who stood in that living room will still be on the case years later, and they get nothing. No suspect, no arrest. There are no answers here. The killer of Becky Spencer is just gone. Now here's something I found while researching the case. I ran Becky Spencer's name through the National Newspaper Archives, summer of 1987, fall 1987, all of it. You know how many articles I found about her murder outside of Rhode Island? None, not a single story. A young mother stabbed dozens of times in her own living room in the safest neighborhood in Warwick, and the country never heard about it. No national headlines and no TV specials. Outside of Rhode Island, it was like it never happened. For 2 years, Becky Spencer was invisible. A cold case in a small state, a file drawer, a family bringing flowers to a grave with no answers. And Buttonwoods? Buttonwoods did what neighborhoods do. It told itself a story. This was a one-time thing. Some drifter, some monster passing through, somebody from outside, because it had to be somebody from outside. That's the only version of the story a neighborhood like this can live with. The doors slowly get unlocked again, the porch lights went back off, and parades came back, life came back. 2 years go by, and I need you to sit with what that actually means. For 2 years, the person who stabbed Becky Spencer 58 times is still there, still in Rhode Island, still in Warwick, still in Buttonwoods. He's riding his bike past locked doors. He's watching the porch lights go back off one by one. He's growing. He's 2 doors down from the house where Becky Spencer died. Buttonwoods thought the nightmare came from outside and left the same way it came. Spoiler alert, it never left. It was home the whole time. Fast forward 2 years, summer of 1989. And before we get to September, you need to know that Warwick is already scared, because 3 weeks earlier on August 10th, a 29-year-old woman named Victoria Cushman was beaten to death by an intruder. Happened in her Warwick apartment. No arrest, an $11,000 reward is on the table, and no answers. So the fear is already in the air. The doors are locking again, and it's about to get so much worse. Metropolitan Drive, right around the corner from where Becky Spencer died. This is the home of Joan Heaton. She's 39 years old, and Joan is a widow. Her husband died back in 1983, and she never remarried. She works at the University of Rhode Island. She's a devoted Catholic, a devoted daughter, and her entire world revolves around 2 people. Her daughters, Jennifer, 10 years old, and Melissa, 8. A widow raising 2 little girls alone in the safest neighborhood anybody knows. It's Labor Day weekend. Friday night, September 1st, 1989. Now, sometime that night, someone comes through the kitchenette window of the Heaton home. He's so big that when he climbs through, his weight actually breaks the table underneath. Now, I'm not going to walk you through exactly what happened inside that house. You don't need it. It's graphic, and frankly, they deserve better. What you need to know is this. Joan Heaton and both of her daughters were killed that night, stabbed and beaten, and the evidence suggested that one of the girls made a run for the phone in the kitchen. She didn't make it. Monday, Labor Day, September 4th. Joan's mother, Marie Bouchard, hasn't heard from her daughter all weekend. So she drives to the house with Joan's sister, Mary Lou. They walk in, and they find them. Marie would tell the first responders, quote, "The last time I saw her was Friday. She was so happy." Now, I want to point out 2 of the men who answered that call, because both of them are going to matter very soon. The first officer on the scene is a young patrolman named Arthur Anderson, and 2 weeks after this day, he quits the police force, walks away. Done. That's what this scene did to the people who saw it. Like I said, graphic. And the paramedic who goes in with life support equipment, praying he could find a pulse, is a 6-foot firefighter named Peter Janite. Remember that name, because at the very end of the story, Peter is going to say something about this case that nobody saw coming. By 5:30 that evening, detectives are getting beeped away from their Labor Day barbecue. A 20-year veteran named Ken Anderson walks into the house and walks back out to his fellow detectives. He says, "I'm going to get that son of a bee who did this. You know it's got to be the same guy who did Spencer 2 years ago." First responders on the scene, and they already knew. 2 years, 2 doors, the same neighborhood. This was never 2 separate stories. Now, I have to slow down here because I owe you some honesty about the numbers in this case. If you look up this case, you're going to see different wound counts in different places. And on this channel, when the sources disagree, I like to show you all of them and tell you where each of them come from. The Associated Press reported dozens of times for Jennifer, the 10-year-old. The police unit that worked the scene counted dozens more for Joan alone. And the FBI's report on this case puts the total across all 3 victims at 120. Now, why don't the numbers match? It's because different agencies counted different things. Per victim, per weapon, wounds versus injuries. And here's what tells you something. The court record, the official record of this case, doesn't use any number. It only says that the killer showed, quote, "an unusual homicidal fury." Now, when the FBI classifies a murder with 20 or more stab wounds, they call it overkill. This case doesn't just cross that line, it left it far behind. The investigation that followed was massive. Over 200 pieces of evidence shipped to the FBI labs in Washington. Dr. Henry Lee, Yes, that Dr. Henry Lee, one of the most famous forensic scientists in America, is working the evidence, a 24-hour hotline. And Buttonwoods? Buttonwoods bought locks and floodlights, they secured their doors and windows, and they worried. But here's the strange part. The part that makes everything worse. Police Chief Wesley Blanchard put a gag order on his own department. 180 officers ordered to say nothing. No updates, no suspects, no warnings. So now we have a terrified town getting total silence from its own police force. And into that silence came the rumors. The worst one said things had been done in that house that I'm not going to repeat here. And when reporters took that rumor to the police, no comment. They went to the medical examiner, no comment. They even asked the funeral home, no comment. I can't tell you if that rumor was true. Nobody ever confirmed it. What I can tell you is that 3 no comments in a row did nothing to make it go away. So count it up. In 2 years, this neighborhood went from never locking its doors to 5 people being murdered. Becky Spencer, Victoria Cushman, Joan, Jennifer, and Melissa Heaton. 5 dead, 0 arrests, and an entire state asking the same question. Who's doing this? The answer was 15 years old, and the police were about 2 weeks from finding him. Tuesday, September 5th, 1989, Quantico, Virginia. The phone rings on the desk of FBI profiler named Greg McCrary. And this is the unit that studied the Bundys and the Dahmers, the guys who wrote the book on serial killers, literally. Now, on the line is Detective Bill McDonald of the Warwick Police, and he needs help fast. Now, normally a profiler visits the scene, reads the autopsy, studies the reports, takes his time. There's no time now. Warwick is in a panic. So McCrary does what the Bureau calls a threshold diagnosis, a profile built over the phone. And here's what he tells McDonald. Forget the drifter theory, forget the stranger theory. When a crime is this violent, it's almost never a stranger. He says, look at the neighborhood. Look for someone within walking distance. A young man, physically strong, someone with a history of problems, someone who knew the victims. Why someone who knew them? Because the killer covered their bodies before he left. He couldn't stand to look at what he'd done. Strangers don't do that. Neighbors do. And McCrary says something that catches the detective's attention. He's probably got a cut on his hands. He explains that in a frenzied attack, the killer's hand slides down the blade. He cuts his own weak hand. Happens all the time. So check every blood sample at the scene because some of it is his. Now here's the part that McCrary doesn't know. The Warwick police found blood in the bathroom, away from the victims. They kept it out of the paper. And McDonald says, quote, it's more than just a possibility. The profiler in Virginia just predicted evidence that he'd never seen. The profile was right about the neighborhood, right about the strength, the history, right about the cut. It was right about everything except one word. Now hold on to that. We're going to come back to it. Now, meanwhile, in Buttonwoods, there's a kid with a cut on his left index finger. In fact, that Sunday, the day before the bodies were even found, he shows the wound to a friend. It's wrapped in tissue. His friend cleans it up and bandages it. And the kid volunteers a story. Says he sliced it breaking into a car to steal a wallet. A week later, that story is bouncing around the Warwick police station, and it lands on the desk of Detective Linda Eastman. Hey Linda, you know that kid you arrested last year, Craig Price? Said he cut his finger breaking into a car with Connecticut plates. What do you think? Eastman doesn't buy this for a second because she knows this kid. She arrested him herself. This is a kid who never admits to anything, and now he's volunteering a confession to a car break-in? So the detectives go looking for that car with Connecticut plates. They walk the streets. They check the reports. There's no car. There's no broken glass. There's no stolen wallet. There's nothing at all here. He confessed to a crime that never happened to cover up for one that did. So who is Craig Price? He's 15 years old. He's 5'10". He's 240 pounds. He lives 2 doors down from the house where Becky Spencer died. And he's already in the system. Burglary arrests going back years. 2 weeks at the state training school. His buddies used his size to bust down doors. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. In August 1989, 3 weeks before the Heaton murders, Craig Price was arrested for assaulting his own 21-year-old sister. He went in front of a court, and the court put him on probation. 2 days later, Joan, Jennifer, and Melissa Heaton were murdered. 2 days. The system had him in its hands for 48 hours before the worst crime in Warwick's history and let him go. It gets stranger because the kids in Buttonwoods had a nickname for Craig Price. For 2 years, they teased him as the Buttonwoods killer. And when they did it, he'd laugh it off, or he'd look at them and say, "Yeah, I did it." And everyone would just take it as a joke. One friend later told police why he got away with it. Craig's philosophy was simple. Criminals get caught because they tell their friends what they've done. Quote, "If you don't tell anyone, you won't get caught." So he told everyone as a joke, kind of hidden in plain sight. Now, that one word the profile got wrong, the FBI's data said that serial killers almost always kill within their own race. Whites kill whites, blacks kill blacks, and so forth. That's what the numbers say. So the profile told Warwick to look for a white man, but Craig Price is black. And I'll be honest with you, inside the police department, that came up. One officer was concerned about potential racial backlash, but Detective Tim Colgan shut it down fast. It doesn't matter if he's blue, black, or purple. The evidence was the evidence, and the evidence was piling up. They polygraphed him, then the state police polygraphed him again a second time because they couldn't afford to be wrong. And then September 14th, the crime lab comes back on that bloody handprint found at the refrigerator door of the Heaton house. The fingerprints match Craig Price. September 16th, the warrant, signed by Judge Alice Gibney, a judge who lived less than 2 miles from the murder scene. And on the list of things to search for, a set of Wesley Forge knives with a wooden block, because Joan Heaton bought a brand new knife set just hours before the murders. The killer used her knives, and a handle to match the broken blade was recovered at the scene. That night, police quietly surrounded the Price house. Nobody was taking a chance he was going to slip away in the dark. Sunday, September 17th, 6 a.m., Kevin Collins rings the doorbell at the Price home. "Good morning, sir. Sorry to disturb you so early, but we have a warrant to search your home." They find Craig asleep. A detective shakes his shoulder and says the words Warwick waited 2 years to hear. "Wake up, Craig Price. I am arresting you for the murders of Joan Heaton, Jennifer Heaton, and Melissa Heaton." By mid-morning, crowds are gathered around Inez Avenue, and the boy next door is under arrest. 11:05 a.m., a tape recorder clicks on at the Warwick police station. By the end of that day, Craig Price confessed, and not just to the Heatons, to all of it, including Becky Spencer when he was just 13 years old. And when they asked him why, his answer was barely human. He said he didn't want to be identified. He killed them, quote, because he was afraid he'd get caught while burglarizing their homes. That's it. That's the whole motive. They saw his face. And one more thing. Some teenagers in town swore that Craig was into Satanism. A friend said that he saw him pick up a copy of the Satanic Bible at a small bookshop about a month before the murders. Now, his own closest friend said that that was nonsense. There was no devil stuff ever. And years later, Craig Price himself put it in writing. He called the occult talk, quote, easy access camouflage, the story a town reaches for when the truth is too hard to look at. And on that one, strangely enough, I think he might be right. 17 days after the murders, 2 years after Becky Spencer, Warwick finally had its answer. And that is exactly when Rhode Island discovered something terrifying. Catching him was the easy part. So Warwick has its killer. It's got a confession on tape, a fingerprint in blood, a snap blade that matches the knife set. It's the strongest case any of these detectives will ever bring in. And now, Rhode Island has to figure out what to do with him. And this is where the story stops being a crime story. This is where it becomes something much stranger, because Craig Price is 15 years old. And in Rhode Island in 1989, that fact beats everything. The confession, the evidence, the 4 bodies, all of it. There's only one courtroom in the entire state that can even touch him. Not Superior Court, no jury. There's going to be no murder trial. Just good old Kent County Family Court, the same courtroom that handles custody disputes and truancy. An official described the legal situation like this. Rhode Island law. He's committed the crime as a juvenile. He confessed. No trial. We can hold him at the training school until he's 21. That's it. Record sealed, and he's free. That's the whole system. That's everything Rhode Island had. September 21st, 1989, 4 days after the arrest, Craig Price stands with his hands cuffed behind him in front of Judge Carmine R. DiPetrillo. His parents, John and Shirley Price, sit behind him. They've seen the evidence. And together with his public defender, the family makes the call to stand by the confession. Craig Price admits to all 4 murders in open court. He agrees on the record with the medical examiner's findings. And Judge DiPetrillo hands down the maximum sentence he's allowed to give: confinement at the Rhode Island Training School for Youth until his 21st birthday, October 11th, 1994. Now do the math with me. 4 human beings, 5 years. That's about 15 months per life. And it gets worse, because the judge orders the case file sealed, and a second judge seals the search warrant. The worst crime in the city's history, and the official record of it just closes. The public will never see the file. As far as the paper trail is concerned, Craig Price is on track to legally vanish in 1994. Now, the scene outside that courthouse is one of the strangest parts of this whole case, because when they bring him out, there's a crowd waiting, and 30 of his friends, they're not there to protest. They're cheering, they're whooping, they're hollering. A girl yells out to get Craig's attention, and Craig Price, 15 years old, in custody for 4 murders, grins. He throws up a 2-fingered salute and yells back, "Later, when I get out, I'm gonna smoke a bomber." Now, his friend said that the bomber line was about marijuana. It was a joke. The whole thing was just a joke. Meanwhile, the man who took his confession, Detective Captain Ronald Carter, gives an interview that reads like a warning flare. He says, "There's nothing there, no emotion whatsoever. The family surely can show some, but with him, there's nothing there." Carter asks the question the whole state is thinking. Is he a psychopath? Nobody could answer that question. And here's the insane part. Legally, nobody had to. No evaluation was required, no diagnosis. There's not even a treatment plan required. Just a calendar counting down to October 11th, 1994. Now, if you're yelling at your screen right now, how is this even possible? I need you to hear this next part. Rhode Island knew before these murders, the state's own Attorney General, James O'Neill, went to the legislature and asked for the power to try juveniles as adults for especially heinous crimes. And the legislature said no. So he asked again, and the legislature again said no. So twice, before Craig Price ever picked up a knife, Rhode Island was warned that this exact loophole existed, and twice the state chose to keep it. That wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. Now, the state scrambles, the family court builds in the only condition it can, rehabilitation. Price is ordered to undergo psychological testing and a psychiatric evaluation so that they can design a treatment program. The goal, written right there into the court record, is to rehabilitate him and return him to the community. December 15th, 1989, Price is back in front of Judge D. Petrillo, and he refuses to take the evaluation. Now, in fairness, I have to tell you why. It's not defiance. His public defender told him not to take it. Her reasoning was pure lawyering. Anything he said in that exam could be used to have him declared mentally ill and locked up in a different institution after his release date. Refusing was, legally speaking, the smart move. Remember that, because that one piece of legal advice is about to shape the next 30 years. Judge D. Petrillo pleads directly to John and Shirley Price to get their son to cooperate. It doesn't work. It was the first time Craig Price faced a court and refused. It would not be the last. And Craig understood his situation perfectly. According to the author who later interviewed him, he knew 5 years would go by fast. He knew the records would be sealed. He figured he'd move somewhere new, maybe even keep his own name and just start over. And honestly, the training school, in his words, wasn't so bad. Now, that Sunday, the Boston Globe ran a 2-page feature on the case, and the headline over the second page said it all. Juvenile crimes law draws fire. An entire state staring at a legal countdown clock. 5 years on the timer, a confessed killer of 4 with a guaranteed exit date and a guaranteed clean record after serving only 5 years of easy time. The law had spoken, and the law said Rhode Island had to let him go. But a handful of people in the state, a detective, a paramedic, a grieving family, and one very stubborn attorney general were about to make a very big decision. The law wasn't going to be the last word here. 1990, the clock is running, and the state of Rhode Island has exactly one legal lever left. The court-ordered evaluation, the one condition built into his sentence, remember? So the family court orders him to comply. February 15th, 1990, he refuses. They order him again. April 26, 1990, he refuses. October 25th, 1990, refuses. October 24th, 1991, refuses. October 22nd, 1992, refuses. October 19th, 1993, he refuses again. 6 court orders, 6 refusals. Now, these aren't my numbers. They're listed in the Rhode Island Supreme Court's opinion. The state asked 6 times. At one of those hearings, a judge named Paul Suttle looks at him and lays it all out. "Mr. Price, you have been asked repeatedly to submit to a psychiatric evaluation, the purpose of which is rehabilitation. If you continue to resist, I may have to cite you for contempt of court." And according to the author who later interviewed him, Craig's reaction in his own head was, "Oh yeah, I do feel contempt for this court." Now, while the courts were asking nicely, the families were done waiting. Picture a community meeting in Warwick and a woman named Suzanne Mulhan at the front of the room, and she explains to the crowd what sealed records actually means. It means that on October 11th, 1994, Craig Price can apply for a gun permit, and on paper, he'll qualify. A pristine record. People in the audience literally gasp. And out of the meetings like that one, a group is born. They call it the Citizens Opposed to the Release of Price, CORP or CORP. And one of the men who helped build CORP's whole strategy was Kevin Collins, the Kevin Collins, the Warwick police captain who rang the doorbell at 6 a.m., the man who arrested Craig Price, then spent years trying to make sure the arrest meant something. And CORP's strategy? It's genius in a heartbreaking kind of way. The state is going to seal his record, the paper trail will be erased, so CORP decides, fine, if the record disappears, we'll make his face the record. Billboards, ads, rallies. There's a plan to link hands all the way around the State House. Providence Journal runs a front page banner headline, "Price Countdown to Freedom," with 3 full pages behind it. Donations start showing up at a P.O. box. Some are checks for $50 or $100, and some are envelopes with $2 bills inside and shaky handwritten notes that say, "I know it isn't much, but I hope it will help." Then Dateline NBC calls, the first national network on the story, and suddenly, this isn't a Rhode Island fight anymore, which brings us to the airplanes. In the spring of 1994, Corps started hiring banner planes, the kind that usually tow marriage proposals over the beach, at about $650 a flight, except these banners over beaches from Boston Harbor to Florida all the way to Laguna Beach, California say this: "Alert! Killer of 4 Craig Price moving here." Think about that. A citizens group flying aerial warnings about one man over 3 different coastlines. Because legally, once that record is sealed, a warning was all they would have. And then, the President of the United States flies to Rhode Island. Bill Clinton, spring of 1994. It's the middle of the national crime bill fight. And as his plane comes in, the welcoming committee includes a single-engine plane towing that banner. Clinton takes questions at a televised town hall at Channel 10 studios, and Corp is told that they can ask exactly one question. The man they send is Jim Martin. He's a prison guard at the ACI and a Corp member. Martin stands up in front of the President of the United States and asks about Craig Price. And Clinton, on camera, says this: "I think it is an outrageous thing that this kid could get out. Apparently, he has refused all treatment and could get out and buy a gun. I think it is wrong." Thunderous applause. And Martin doesn't sit down. He presses the President of the United States with one more line. "He slaughtered 2 women and 2 babies, sir." A murder case from a family court in Warwick, Rhode Island, just reached the White House. And meanwhile, the lawyers are using everything they have. Attorney General Jeffrey Pine spends 4 years hunting for a loophole. Governor Sudlin hires a heavyweight Washington attorney, Brendan Sullivan, to help draft a bill that would hold Price after release. A young legislator named James Langevin, who'd been writing Price bills since 1989, pushes his own. And Rhode Island does change its laws. Juveniles who kill can now be tried as adults. But none of it can be applied to Craig Price. You can't rewrite a law backwards. The Constitution won't let you. Every road leads back to the same place. The only handle the state ever had on Craig Price is that stack of 6 refusals. June 27th, 1994. 3.5 months before the birthday, the chief judge of the family court, Judge Jeremiah, finds Craig Price in civil contempt of court. And civil contempt of court comes with a special power. The court can hold you until you comply. So Price is moved out of the training school and into the adult correctional institutions. Remember the ACI? Maximum hold, 1 year. The key to his door is in his pocket. Take the evaluation and the contempt dissolves. And here, at the very last minute, Craig Price finally blinks. August 1994, he sits down with a psychiatrist and he lies. He lies about the murders, about his role. The psychiatrist compares his story to the facts Price himself admitted in court in 1989 and reports that they, quote, differed markedly. 19 days before the 1-year limit runs out, his motion to be released is denied, and the state files a brand new charge, criminal contempt. It's October 1994 now, the same month as the birthday, and Craig Price is suddenly a very busy man in court. 1 week before he turns 21, he's convicted at Superior Court as an adult for assault and extortion for threatening to kill a guard at the training school. Sentencing sat for November 18th. The criminal contempt trial is still ahead of him. And then the day itself arrived, October 11th, 1994. You already know what that evening looked like. the candles, the State House steps, Call Batty and the Flame, and Governor Sudlin that night with one more line that we haven't used yet. Hopefully that's where he'll mark many more returns of that day. The murder sentence expired, the record sealed, and the door somehow stayed shut. But look closely at the receipts holding it shut. Contempt of court, assault, extortion, lying to a psychiatrist. Not one word in that stack says murder. Rhode Island never beat that loophole. It just built a cage out of paperwork. And now, somebody had to keep it standing. So the birthday came and went, and the door stayed shut. But understand what Rhode Island is actually holding here. A cage made of paperwork. And paperwork expires. What happens next is a 25-year chain reaction. I'm gonna give it to you the way it actually happened. Date by date, brick by brick. November 1994, remember that Superior Court conviction from the week before his birthday? Threatening to kill a guard at the training school, assault, and extortion? The sentence comes down 7 years. His first adult sentence for something he did inside. And outside the courthouse, in the December cold, Carl Batty, Becky's brother, faces the cameras. By now, some people are asking whether race played a part in the fight to keep Price locked up. And Carl answers that head on, says, "We've never considered whether or not he was black, white, brown, or green. The only thing we considered was, by the time he was 15 years old, he brutally murdered 4 people. And then, as long as we have him behind bars, we think the streets are safe from Craig Price." And a blue prison van carries Craig Price up the hill to prison. 7 more years on the block. The countdown starts over. 1995, the state chapter of the NAACP looks at the case and announces it may seek to support his appeals. An injustice has been done to this innocent young man. In a way, maybe he's the victim. Their concern is that we, society, failed Price. We are responsible here. He's been treated more harshly because he's black, not because he murdered 4 innocent people. It's a serious question. It deserved to be asked. Was Price the real victim here? In the end, the effort kind of faded away. The prevailing view was that Craig Price didn't represent anybody but Craig Price. Black, white, green, or orange. What he did was unconscionable for any color of human being, period. 1996, the Rhode Island Supreme Court clears the way for something almost unheard of, a criminal trial for contempt of court for those 6 refusals. And before that trial can even start, Craig pours fuel on the fire. A fight with 2 guards at the correctional facility over an order to clean out his cell. Prosecutors use it to add another year. He's now serving 8 on what was legally a 5-year sentence. It would be comical if it wasn't so horrendous. May 1997, the contempt trial. Several days of testimony, and on the stand, Craig Price finally explains why he refused those evaluations. Says, "They weren't trying to rehabilitate me, their main focus was to lock me up." And here's the thing, after everything you've seen in this video, the jury doesn't care, they find him guilty. July 1997, Judge Albert DeRobio hands down the sentence for refusing a psychiatric exam. 25 years, 10 to serve on top of the 8 he's already stacked, 15 suspended hanging over his head, 25 years for contempt of court. Got that? To put that in perspective, that's one of the harshest contempt sentences in American history. And Craig Price stands up in the courtroom, and for the first time in this entire story, he says the words, quote, "I don't want to sound disrespectful to this court. It's very hard to come out and say this. This sentence itself cannot take the fact that I'm sorry for the homicides. I'm sorry for everything of that." Now, I need to be fair and precise with you here. In 1989, officials said that he showed no remorse, none. In 1997, he apologized in open court. Both of those things are true 8 years apart. You could decide for yourself what changed and whether to believe it, because he wasn't done talking. He also told the judge, the sentence of 10 years, whether you know it or not, is definitely a life in jail. There's no way I'm gonna skate through 10 years of jail doing the right thing. Got that? He told the court to its face that he wouldn't survive 10 years without new charges. And he was right. 1998, a probation violation. 7 of those suspended years revoked. 2003, the Rhode Island Supreme Court reviews the whole thing and affirms it, all of it. 2004, and now Rhode Island does something extraordinary. It ships Craig Price out, an interstate transfer to the Florida prison system. Officially, he's a security risk to Rhode Island's own facilities. Think about what that means. A state so finished with this man, it outsourced him. 2009, a Florida prison fight, a homemade shiv. He gets more time. And then April 4th, 2017, Suwannee Correctional Institution, Florida. Craig Price, now 43 years old, attacks a fellow inmate named Joshua Davis with a 5-inch homemade blade. And this time, it's all caught on prison video. 2018, while this case is still pending, something surfaces back in Rhode Island. An envelope arrives anonymously at the Providence TV station, and inside is a copy of the tape. The 1989 confession. Law enforcement authenticates it, and for the first time in 29 years, Rhode Islanders actually hear the voice of a 15-year-old Craig Price calmly describing what he did. This was 1 year before his time was finally set to run out. January 18th, 2019. A Florida courtroom. Craig Price pleads guilty to attempted murder, and Florida does not do paperwork cages. 25 years, minimum 85% served, no parole, sentenced as a habitual felony offender. He even waives the 524 days of credit that he already earned. And after 25 years, 10 years of probation, violated, and Florida can hold him for life. Oh, and Rhode Island filed a detainer, a legal claim that says if Florida ever lets him out, we'll be waiting at the gate. The law of Rhode Island says that Craig Price walks free at 21 with a clean record. Instead, he'll be roughly 66 years old before Florida is done with him. And then comes the probation. And then comes Rhode Island still holding its claim. He was 15 when they arrested him. He's now been locked up for 37 years. And every single brick in that wall since 1994, he laid himself. Contempt, threats, fights, a blade in a prison yard. The state built the cage, but Craig Price keeps locking the door. I want to take you back to that Boston Globe Sunday page, September 24th, 1989, the one I pulled at the start of all this, because the editors did something that day, maybe without even realizing it. On one side of the page, the Craig Price story, the case Rhode Island solved in 17 days with 25 detectives working round the clock, and printed right next to it on a second headline, Unsolved Killings, Time is Detectives' Greatest Enemy. Same page, same Sunday, and that second article is the one that haunts me. Here's what it reported. Nationally, the FBI said 30% of murders go unsolved. At that rate, Rhode Island would have piled up more than 50 unsolved homicides in the previous 5 years. And here's the kicker, nobody could even say the real number, because in 1989, Rhode Island kept no statewide figures on unsolved murders. 50 plus families, no answers. And no one officially was even counting. Some of those files you already heard tonight. Since 1985, 6 women have been found dead, most of them left along roadsides in Rhode Island and just over the Massachusetts line. A 29-year-old named Marilyn Burton was the first. She was found strangled in the woods in April 1985. Witnesses kept mentioning a light-colored van, and police went out of their way to say that these were not the work of one man, no serial killer. They insisted that. Just sit with the irony of that for a second. Rhode Island spent the late 80s terrified that a serial killer was hunting its women, and there was a serial killer in Rhode Island. He was 15 years old, and nobody had any idea. Then there were the children. Michelle Norris, 7 years old, Central Falls, last seen May 1988, found near a playground. Christine Cole, 10 years old. Her body was found on the banks of the Providence River in February 1988. They were 2 of 5 children killed in Rhode Island in just 1987 and 1988. Arrests came in only 3 of those 5 cases. By the time the Globe went to print, Michelle and Christine's case were stalled. And then there's Victoria Cushman. You met her at the start of September, beaten to death by an intruder in her Warwick apartment 3 weeks before the Heatons. Same city, same summer. And while 25 detectives worked the Heaton case around the clock, Victoria's father, Robinson Cushman, was out making public pleas, begging for help, an $11,000 reward on the table. Now let me be crystal clear about something. I'm not telling you that these cases are connected. Nobody has ever shown that. The police, the courts, nobody. And I'm not going to start. What I'm showing you is a ledger. We got 25 detectives and a father to hold a press conference alone. So why did Rhode Island have 50 unsolved files? The Globe asked the police chiefs themselves, and their answers are kind of remarkable. Cumberland's chief, John Partington, said departments simply don't talk to each other. Quote, "There's no sharing of information, sitting down together like we used to. We're a small state." And his diagnosis for the whole system? There's a definite lack of follow-through. A small state. 50 unsolved murders. and the chief is admitting on the record that nobody was comparing notes. But the same article carried one story that shows what follow-up could do. 1981 South Kingstown, a 5-year-old boy named Jason Foreman disappears. And the police chief there, Vincent Vespia, refuses to file it away. He takes the town's 2 unsolved cases and keeps the file sitting on his desk for years. About 7 years later, an assault on another boy points police to a suspect, a neighbor of the Foreman family, and Jason's remains are found inside that neighbor's house. It was solved because one chief refused to let it go. And notice the answer when it finally came? It wasn't a drifter or a stranger passing through, it was the neighbor. It's always the neighbor. So here's what I keep coming back to. The Craig Price case isn't the story of a justice system that works. It's the story of what that system can do when it decides to spend everything on one case. 25 detectives, the FBI, Dr. Henry Lee, a governor, a president, an entire state's legal machinery built around one name, and 2 pages of newsprint away, 50 families whose cases got none of that. Some of them are still waiting. Rhode Island proved that it could move heaven and earth once. Now hold both of those truths in your hands, because in the final chapter of this story, we have to decide what it all actually means. We're going to open the ledger one last time. 1989, the law of Rhode Island said Craig Price walks free at 21. Clean record, sealed file, gone like it never happened. 2026, the reality. Craig Price is 52 years old. He sits in the Union Correctional Institution in Florida. He's well over a decade left to serve, then 10 years of probation with life hanging over any violation. And behind all that, Rhode Island's detainer. It's still waiting patiently. He's been locked up for 37 straight years, and I want to say the quiet part out loud one final time. Not a single day since October 11th, 1994 has been for the murders. The murders brought him a mere 5 years. Everything since is contempt, threats, assaults, a blade in a prison yard. The law never caught up with Craig Price. Craig Price kept catching up to the law. And in 2011, the whole strange machine produced one final scene that I can't get out of my head. Craig Price, 22 years into his imprisonment, went back to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and his lawyer stood up and told the justices something remarkable. He's willing now. After all these years, Craig Price is finally willing to undergo the psychiatric treatment. The same evaluation that 6 court orders couldn't get. The same exam a president of the United States complained about. The thing this entire war was fought over. He'll do it. And the Supreme Court of Rhode Island answered in its official written opinion pretty succinctly. It is of no consequence. Too late. The offer that would have changed everything in 1990 meant nothing in 2011. The cage no longer needed his cooperation. It ran on its own. And that is exactly where I have to be honest with you about the uncomfortable part of this story. Because there are 2 true things here, and they don't fit together comfortably. Truth number 1. Nobody wanted this man out. Not then or now, probably not ever. Truth number 2, look at how they kept him in. A 25-year sentence for contempt of court, laws drafted around one specific human being, a refusal that started as his lawyer's advice somehow transformed into 3 decades behind bars. The ACLU of Rhode Island fought this thing the entire way. Their argument was that if a state was powerful enough to improvise a 37-year sentence for one man, it's powerful enough to do it to anyone. And you might expect the people closest to this case to hate that argument. Which brings me back to Peter Janight. Remember him? The 6'3" paramedic? The first man through the door with life support equipment praying over Melissa Heaton, the man this case gave nightmares for years? Well, Peter went on to become a Rhode Island state legislator. The paramedic became a lawmaker. And years later, he said, the Craig Price case made me appreciate civil liberties even more, and no punishment is adequate for what I saw the day in the Heaton house. But 80% of what the ACLU says is correct. Sit with that. The man who saw the very worst of it with his own eyes, he didn't come out of that house demanding the Constitution get out of the way. He came out believing it mattered more. I don't know a better way to hold on to both truths than that. And now the legacy. Rhode Island rewrote its laws. Today, a juvenile who commits murder can be tried as an adult. The exact power the Attorney General begged for twice before 1989. It just didn't stop at the state line. By the mid-90s, 37 states proposed rewrites to their own juvenile justice laws. And when 2 boys in Arkansas, 11 and 13 years old, killed 4 classmates and a teacher in 1998, the state realized that they were going to walk free at 18. And every headline in America reached the same 2 words: Craig Price. His name became the legal shorthand for a hole in the system, and in Rhode Island, his name became something else. A generation of Rhode Island kids born after 1994 grew up scared of Craig Price. Go online today and you'll find locals still talking about this case. There's even a Rhode Island internet horror fiction that name drops him as a real monster to make the fake ones feel scarier. The state that couldn't hold him legally holds him in memory. Which brings me to a myth that I need to correct, because I promised you we deal in the record on this channel. You'll find people online who swear that Craig Price got out years ago and is living under a new name. It's false. Flat out false. He's in a Florida maximum security prison right now. But notice why that legend survives. Because it's exactly what the 1989 law promised would happen. Sealed record and new start. A man who planned to move away and begin again. So in that context, the myth isn't crazy. The myth is just the original law remembered as a ghost story. And now let me take you to one last place. There's a road in Buttonwoods called Asylum Road. It runs from the neighborhood where all this happened down to Warwick City Park on Buttonwoods Cove. And just inside that park, under the trees, there's a white wooden gazebo. Green roof, lattice work, 2 stone benches, and set in the ground in front of it, like a cemetery marker, is a bronze plaque. It reads, "Remembering the victims of violence in Buttonwoods, a living memorial to Rebecca Spencer, 1987, Joan, Melissa, and Jennifer Heaton, 1989, dedicated April 27, 1995. For years, Carl Batty visited his sister's grave to bring her flowers and news. News of the fight. News that the door was still shut. Rebecca Spencer, Joan Heaton, Jennifer, Melissa, 2 doors down and around the corner. The town put up floodlights. The state rewrote its laws. A president weighed in, and the door he promised to walk out of stayed shut for 37 years. Later, he told the cheering crowd in 1989, "It's been 37 years. There's no later." I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.